The door handle turned slowly in the darkness. Mina's eyes flew open as footsteps approached her bed. A tall silhouette emerged from the shadows, broad-shouldered and undeniably him. Her breath caught as moonlight illuminated his face. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're standing." His dark eyes locked onto hers with predatory intensity. "I've always been able to stand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I just didn't want to stand without you." If you're already hooked, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to get intense. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The rain hammered against the windows of the Kim estate 11 months earlier when Mina first arrived. She clutched her nursing credentials in trembling hands, staring up at the massive, traditional Korean house that would become her prison and her sanctuary. The job posting had been simple. Live-in caregiver needed for private patient. Excellent pay, complete discretion required. What it hadn't mentioned was that her patient would be Kim Jae-hyun, one of South Korea's most powerful CEOs, a man whose empire had crumbled in a single night. The accident had happened 6 months before. The details were murky, whispered about in hushed tones by the household staff. A car crash on a mountain road. His fiancée had been driving. She'd walked away without a scratch. He'd been pulled from the wreckage, paralyzed from the waist down, his spine shattered, his life destroyed. Within 2 weeks, his fiancée had returned her engagement ring and disappeared. His stepbrother had seized control of his company. His father had died 3 months later, some said from a broken heart, others from shame. Mrs. Choi, the head housekeeper, had led Mina through the silent corridors of the house that first day. "He doesn't speak much," the older woman had warned. "4 caregivers before you, none lasted more than a month. He's difficult, angry, sometimes cruel." "I can handle difficult," Mina had replied with more confidence than she felt. Nothing could have prepared her for Jae-hyun. He sat in his wheelchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his bedroom, bathed in gray morning light. Even seated, even broken, he commanded the space with an almost violent presence. His profile was sharp enough to cut, all brutal angles and aristocratic lines. Dark hair fell across his forehead, longer than it should be, unkempt in a way that somehow made him more devastating. He wore black from neck to toe, expensive fabrics draped over a body that was still lean and muscular despite months of inactivity. "Mr. Kim," Mina had said softly in her accented Korean, approaching with her medical bag. "My name is Mina. I'll be taking care of you from now on." He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her existence. The silence stretched until it became oppressive, filling the room like smoke. She knelt, beside his wheelchair, forcing herself into his line of sight. That's when he finally looked at her, and the impact of his gaze nearly knocked her backward. His eyes were the darkest she'd ever seen, nearly black, and they held nothing but cold assessment as they swept over her face with calculated precision. "You won't last a week," he said. His voice was rough, underused, and it slid over her skin like gravel wrapped in silk. "The others couldn't handle me." "What makes you think you're different?" "Maybe I am different," she replied, meeting his stare without flinching. "Or maybe I'm just more stubborn than they were." Something flickered in his eyes, gone too quickly to identify. "We'll see." The first week had been hell. He refused to eat the meals she prepared, letting them go cold on the tray. He wouldn't take his medications unless she stood there and watched him swallow each pill. When she tried to help him with basic physical therapy, exercises, he'd go completely rigid, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. But Mina had dealt with difficult patients before. She'd worked in overcrowded hospitals where pain manifested as anger, where fear wore the mask of cruelty. She recognized the signs. Jae-hyun wasn't angry at her. He was angry at himself, at his body, at a world that had stolen everything from him in one terrible moment. So she stayed. She woke at dawn to prepare his breakfast, always making sure his coffee was exactly the right temperature. She helped him dress, her hands professional and gentle, as she navigated the intimate invasion of caring for a grown man's body. She read medical journals to him in the evenings, her voice soft and steady in the quiet of his room. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to soften. It started small. He stopped letting his food go cold. He took his medications without her having to ask. When she massaged his legs during physical therapy, he no longer tensed beneath her touch. And sometimes, when she read to him at night, she could feel his eyes on her face, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. 3 months into her employment, everything changed. Dr. Yoon, the neurologist who'd been treating Jae-hyun since the accident, had sent a new physical therapist to evaluate his progress. The man was young, perhaps 30, with an easy smile and friendly demeanor. He'd introduced himself to Mina in the hallway, his eyes lingering on her face a moment too long. "You must be Mina," he'd said, extending his hand. "I'm therapist Min. I've heard you're the only caregiver who's managed to stick around. That's impressive." "Mr. Kim isn't as difficult as people say," she'd replied, shaking his hand briefly before pulling away. "Still, it must be isolating, being here all the time. Maybe we could get coffee sometime, compare notes on our patient?" Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through the hallway. "Mina." She'd turned to find Jae-hyun in his wheelchair at the end of the corridor, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. His knuckles were white where they gripped the wheels. "I need you. Now." The therapist had raised his eyebrows but said nothing as Mina hurried to Jae-hyun's side. She'd wheeled him back to his room in silence, aware of the tension radiating from his body like heat. "What was that about?" she'd asked once they were alone. "You're here to take care of me," he'd said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not to flirt with every man who walks through that door." "I wasn't flirting. He was being friendly." "Friendly?" He'd laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call it when a man looks at you like he wants to devour you?" Heat had flooded Mina's cheeks. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" He'd wheeled himself closer. So close. She could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "Tell me, Mina, do you let all your patients get jealous, or just me?" The word hung between them like a confession. Jealous. He was jealous. This powerful, broken man was jealous because another man had smiled at her. "Mr. Kim," she'd whispered, her heart hammering, "this isn't appropriate." "Nothing about this is appropriate," he'd replied. "Nothing about what I feel when you touch me is appropriate. Nothing about the way I wait for you every morning, the way I listen for your footsteps, the way I've memorized every expression on your face. None of it is appropriate. But I can't seem to stop." She'd fled then, her hands shaking, her mind reeling. She'd locked herself in her small quarters and pressed her palms against her burning cheeks, trying to calm her racing heart. This was wrong. He was her patient, her employer. She had no right to feel this pull toward him, this magnetic attraction that grew stronger every day. She had no right to notice the way his muscles flexed when she helped him transfer from wheelchair to bed. She had no right to feel warm when his fingers brushed against hers. She had no right to lie awake at night thinking about the way he said her name, like it was something precious. But she did. God help her. She did. The next morning, she'd entered his room determined to maintain professional distance. He'd been by the window as always, but when she approached, he'd reached out and caught her wrist gently. "I'm sorry," he'd said. "I was out of line yesterday." "It's fine." "It's not fine." His thumb had moved against her pulse point, probably feeling how fast her heart was beating. "But I won't apologize for being honest with you. You're the only real thing in my life right now, Mina. The only thing that isn't pity, or obligation, or duty. When you're in this room, I remember what it feels like to be human, instead of broken." She should have pulled away, should have established boundaries. Instead, she'd found herself saying, "You're not broken. You're healing." "Am I?" His eyes had searched hers. "Some days I'm not sure anymore." The weeks that followed were torture of the sweetest kind. Every touch became charged with awareness. When she helped him bathe, she was hyper-aware of the way water sluiced over his shoulders, the hard planes of his chest, the ridges of muscle along his abdomen. When she massaged his legs, she felt the tension in his body, heard the sharp intake of his breath when her hands moved higher on his thighs. He watched her constantly now, his eyes following her movements with predatory focus. Sometimes she'd catch him staring and he wouldn't look away, wouldn't pretend, would just hold her gaze until she had to turn aside, her cheeks flaming. One evening, while helping him change for bed, her hand had lingered too long on his chest. She'd felt his heartbeat beneath her palm, fast and strong, matching her own racing pulse. When she'd finally looked up, his eyes had been molten with barely restrained desire. "Mina," he'd said, her name almost a growl. He'd caught her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. "You need to stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" she'd whispered. "Like you want me as much as I want you." The admission had stolen her breath. For a long moment they'd simply stared at each other, the air between them electric with tension. Then she'd pulled away, her hands shaking. "I can't," she'd said. "We can't." "Why not?" "Because you're my patient. Because this is my job. Because it's wrong." "Is it?" He'd leaned forward as much as he could from his wheelchair. "Tell me, Mina. Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me you don't think about me the way I think about you. Tell me you don't want me, and I'll never mention it again." She'd opened her mouth to lie, but the words wouldn't come. Because she did feel it. She did think about him. She did want him with a fierceness that terrified her. "I thought so," he'd said softly when she remained silent. Then, unexpectedly, he'd smiled, and it had transformed his entire face. "Don't worry, I'm a patient man. I can wait." But Mina wasn't sure she could. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she'd finally admitted the truth to herself. She was falling in love with Kim Jae-hyun. Maybe she'd been falling since that first day when he'd looked at her with those dark, wounded eyes. Maybe she'd been falling every time he softened under her touch, every time he smiled at something she said, every time he watched her like she was the only thing in his world worth watching. It was hopeless, forbidden, impossible. And yet, she couldn't stop. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you're Team Mina or Team Jae-hyun, because things are about to get even more complicated. And don't forget to like this video if you're loving this story so far. What Mina didn't know, what she couldn't see, was what happened after she left his room each night. She didn't see Jae-hyun wait until her footsteps faded down the hallway. She didn't see him grip the arms of his wheelchair with white-knuckled intensity. She didn't see him slowly, carefully, push himself to standing. His legs held him perfectly. They had for months now. In the darkness of his room, Jae-hyun walked. He paced back and forth with controlled precision, his muscles responding flawlessly to every command. The doctors had been wrong about the permanence of his paralysis. His spine had healed. His body had recovered. He'd known for 4 months now, had felt the sensation returning to his legs, had tested his weight in secret until he was certain. And he'd told no one. At first, it had been caution. He'd wanted to be absolutely sure before announcing his recovery, before facing the chaos that would erupt when the world discovered Kim Jae-hyun was no longer broken. But then Mina had arrived, and everything had changed. She treated him like a person. Not a tragedy. Not a fallen king. Not an object of pity. She scolded him when he was being difficult, laughed at his rare attempts at humor, and touched him with a gentleness that had nothing to do with his supposed disability and everything to do with who she was. If he revealed his recovery, she would leave. Her job would be finished. She would walk out of his life as suddenly as she'd entered it, and the thought was unbearable. So he'd kept his secret, hating himself for the deception, even as he craved her presence like air. Every morning when she entered his room, every evening when she read to him, every moment she spent at his side. He was stealing time he had no right to take. But he couldn't stop. He was obsessed. Consumed. He needed her in a way that went far beyond physical desire, though God knew he wanted her with an intensity that bordered on madness. He needed her voice, her smile, the way she looked at him like he mattered. Tonight, after she'd fled from his confession, Jae-hyun stood at his window and made a decision. He would tell her the truth. Tomorrow. He would reveal that he could walk, and then he would ask her to stay anyway. Not as his caregiver, but as his woman. The thought of her rejection terrified him more than the accident had, more than losing his company, more than anything he'd ever faced. But he had no choice. This deception had gone on long enough. The next morning, Jae-hyun's resolve wavered the moment Mina entered his room. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well, and there was something fragile in her expression that made his chest tighten. She went about her morning routine quietly, helping him dress with her usual gentle efficiency, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. "Mina?" he said softly as she buttoned his shirt. "We need to talk." "About yesterday? It's fine. We can forget it happened." "I don't want to forget it happened." He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest. "I meant every word." She finally looked at him, and he saw his own torment reflected in her eyes. "This can't happen, Jae-hyun. You have to understand that." Hearing his name from her lips, without the formal honorific, sent electricity through his veins. Why not? Because you're vulnerable right now. Because you've been through trauma. Because once you're better, once you've healed emotionally, you'll realize this was just proximity and gratitude confused for something else. "You think I don't know the difference?" His voice came out harder than he intended. "You think I haven't analyzed this from every angle? I know exactly what I feel, Mina. The question is, do you?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Choi knocked on the door. "Miss Mina, there's a phone call for you, from the international office." Mina pulled her hand away from his chest, relief and regret warring on her face. "I'll be right back." She was gone for 20 minutes. When she returned, everything about her had changed. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly together, and she wouldn't look at him directly. "What is it?" Jae-hyun demanded, wheeling closer. "What's wrong?" "I've been accepted," she said quietly, "into a nursing scholarship program in Germany. Advanced training, full sponsorship. It's an incredible opportunity." The words hit him like a physical blow. Germany. "I applied months ago before I came here. I never thought I'd actually get in, but..." She took a shaky breath. "They want me to start in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He had 6 weeks before she disappeared from his life forever. Are you going to accept?" The question came out flat, emotionless, but inside he was screaming. "I don't know. I need to think about it." "What's there to think about?" He couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "It's an incredible opportunity, like you said. Career advancement. Everything you've been working toward. Jae-hyun, don't." He turned his wheelchair away from her, staring out the window with unseeing eyes. "You should go. It's a good opportunity." "You don't mean that?" "Yes, I do." "Liar. You deserve more than being trapped here taking care of someone who can't even..." He stopped himself, jaw clenched. She moved into his line of sight, kneeling in front of his wheelchair the way she had that first day. "You're not a burden. You've never been a burden. Taking care of you has been..." Her voice cracked. "It's been the best part of my life." "Then stay." The words hung between them, raw and desperate. Mina's eyes filled with tears. "You don't need me forever," she whispered. "And I need to learn to live too, Jae-hyun. I need to have a life outside of these walls, outside of being your caregiver. Can't you see that?" He could see it. That was the problem. He could see exactly how selfish he was being, how wrong it was to want to keep her here, trapped in his orbit. But he couldn't seem to care. "Fine," he said coldly, his walls slamming back into place. "Start making arrangements. I'll contact the agency for a replacement. He wheeled away before he could see the hurt on her face, before he could take the words back. He heard her leave, heard the door close softly behind her, and then he was alone. For exactly 30 seconds he maintained control. Then he grabbed the nearest object, a crystal paperweight from his desk, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall with a satisfying crash. Another paperweight followed, then a book, then another, until his desk was cleared and the floor was littered with broken glass and scattered papers. "You don't get to walk away from me," he growled to the empty room. "I won't let you." But even as he said it, he knew he had no right to stop her. No right to demand she sacrifice her future for a man who couldn't even stand on his own 2 feet. Except he could stand. He could walk. He could chase after her if he wanted to. The realization crystallized into a plan. He would tell her tonight. He would reveal everything, and then he would make her understand that this wasn't just proximity or gratitude, that what he felt for her was real and consuming and permanent. And if she still chose to leave, at least she would know the truth. The day passed in agonizing slowness. Mina went about her duties with quiet efficiency, but there was a distance between them now, a chasm that widened with every passing hour. She helped him with lunch, administered his, medications guided him through physical therapy exercises with hands that trembled slightly. "I haven't made a decision yet," she said suddenly as she massaged his legs. "About Germany. You should accept." He forced the words out. "It's a good opportunity." "Is that really what you want?" What he wanted was to pull her into his lap and kiss her until she forgot Germany existed. What he wanted was to tell her he loved her, that he'd been in love with her for months, that the thought of losing her was slowly killing him. Instead, he said, "What I want doesn't matter. This is your life, Mina. Your choice." That evening she read to him as usual, her voice soft in the lamplight. But instead of a medical journal, she'd chosen a novel, something about star-crossed lovers separated by circumstance. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. When she finished the chapter and stood to leave, Jae-hyun caught her hand. "Stay," he said. "Just a little longer." She hesitated, then sat back down on the edge of his bed. They stayed like that in silence, his hand wrapped around hers, both of them acutely aware that their time was running out. "I'll miss you," she finally whispered. "Even if I go, even if I'm on the other side of the world, I'll miss you every single day. Then don't go. You know I have to." "No," he said fiercely. "You don't have to. You choose to. There's a difference." She pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "That's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair." He stared up at her, letting her see everything he felt. "Nothing about falling in love with you has been fair, but I did it anyway." The confession hung between them like lightning about to strike. Mina's eyes went wide, her breath catching audibly. "You don't love me," she said, but her voice wavered. "You can't." "Can't I?" He laughed bitterly. "Tell me how to stop then. Tell me how to not love the way you hum while you cook. Tell me how to not love the way you read to me at night. Tell me how to not love your strength, your compassion, your terrible singing voice in the morning. Tell me how to not love every damn thing about you, and I'll do it. Jae-hyun, I love you, Mina, and I think you love me too. So before you run away to Germany, before you convince yourself this is just some confused attachment, I need you to admit it. Just once. Tell me the truth." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "It doesn't matter what I feel. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything." "How? How does it change anything? You're still my patient. I'm still your caregiver. This is still impossible." He wanted to tell her then, wanted to stand up and prove that nothing was impossible. But the words stuck in his throat, choked by shame and fear, and the knowledge that his deception might destroy whatever chance they had. "Go," he said finally. "Before I say something else we'll both regret." She fled, and Jae-hyun let her go. But later that night, as a storm rolled in and thunder shook the windows, he made his decision. No more waiting. No more deception. Tonight, she would know everything. Mina lay in her narrow bed, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Rain hammered against her window, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled ominously. She'd been crying on and off for hours, her pillow damp with tears. He loved her. Jae-hyun loved her. And she loved him. God help her. She loved him desperately, hopelessly, completely. But love wasn't enough. Love couldn't bridge the gap between caregiver and patient, couldn't erase the power imbalance, couldn't change the fact that he needed her in ways that had nothing to do with romance. She'd decided to accept the Germany position. Tomorrow, she would tell him. Tomorrow, she would start the process of leaving. Tomorrow, she would begin the agonizing work of forgetting Kim Jae-hyun. A sound made her freeze. The door handle was turning slowly, deliberately. Her heart seized as the door opened, spilling hallway light into her dark room. A silhouette filled the doorway, broad-shouldered and unmistakably masculine. "Jae-hyun?" she breathed. "What are you—" Then she saw. He wasn't in his wheelchair. He was standing, tall and powerful, water droplets from his shower still glistening in his dark hair. His white shirt was unbuttoned, revealing the sculpted planes of his chest, and his bare feet made no sound as he stepped into her room. "You," she whispered, sitting up in shock. "You're standing." He closed the door behind him, his eyes never leaving her face. "I've always been able to stand. I just didn't want to stand without you." The words from her nightmare, from her fantasies. But this was real. He was real, walking toward her bed with predatory grace, and everything she thought she knew was shattering. "I don't understand," her voice shook. "The doctors said—" "The doctors were wrong." He stopped at the foot of her bed, towering over her. "I healed. Months ago. I've been able to walk since before you started having feelings for me." The implications hit her like a tidal wave. "You lied. All this time you've been lying." "Yes. Why?" The word came out broken. "Because I was afraid you'd leave." He moved closer, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Because from the moment you walked into my room and looked at me like I was still human, I knew I couldn't let you go. So I lied. I kept you here with deception and manipulation, and I don't regret it. I should, but I don't." Mina scrambled backward until her spine hit the wall. "You're insane." "Probably." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face with one large hand, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheek. "I kept you here because I wanted you, not as my nurse, not as my caregiver, as mine." "That's not love," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "That's obsession." "Maybe it's both." His eyes were molten, burning with intensity. "Maybe I'm so obsessed with you that it became love. Or maybe I loved you first and the obsession grew from that. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. You lied to me. You used me." "I know." He leaned closer, and she could smell his soap, his skin, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I know, and I'm not going to apologize. I'd do it again. I'd do worse to keep you." She should have been terrified, should have pushed him away, should have run. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her body betraying every rational thought in her head. "I hate you," she whispered. "No, you don't." His other hand came up to frame her, face tilting it toward his. "You love me. You said so yourself. Or did you think I couldn't hear you crying in here, saying my name?" Heat flooded her face. "That's not fair." "I told you, nothing about this is fair." He leaned in until their foreheads touched, until she could feel his breath against her lips. But I'm done playing fair, Mina. I'm done pretending I don't want you. I'm done watching you walk away. So here's the truth. I love you. I want you. I need you. And I'm not letting you go to Germany or anywhere else. You're mine. You can't just decide that. Watch me. His voice dropped to a growl that sent shivers through her entire body. Tell me you don't want this. Tell me you don't think about me the way I think about you. Tell me to leave, and I will. But be honest for once. She opened her mouth to tell him to go, to tell him he was wrong. But the words wouldn't come. Because he wasn't wrong. She did want this. She wanted him with a fierceness that terrified her. I can't, she whispered. I can't do this. Yes, you can. His thumb traced her lower lip. Stop fighting what we both want. You lied to me. I know. You manipulated me. I know. I should hate you for this. But you don't. It wasn't a question. She didn't. That was the problem. Even knowing what he'd done, even understanding the depth of his deception, she couldn't hate him. She could only love him more desperately than before. This is wrong, she tried one last time. Then why does it feel so right? He kissed her. Finally, after months of tension and longing and desperate restraint, he closed the last inch between them and claimed her mouth with his. The kiss was everything she'd imagined and nothing she'd expected, fierce and possessive and achingly tender all at once. His hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and she melted into him with a soft sound of surrender. All the fight went out of her. All the rational arguments, all the reasons why this was impossible, all of it burned away in the heat of his mouth on hers. She kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands finding the bare skin of his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palms. Say it, he demanded against her lips. Say you're mine. I'm yours, she breathed, and saying it felt like falling and flying at the same time. He gathered her closer, pulling her into his lap, and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck. They kissed like they were drowning, and each other was air, months of pent-up desire finally given free rein. I love you, he murmured between kisses, his lips tracing down her jaw to her throat. I love you, and I'm never letting you go. She should have protested, should have demanded more explanations, more apologies, but his mouth was doing sinful things to the sensitive skin below her ear, and coherent thought was becoming impossible. Stay with me, he said, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. Not as my caregiver, as my woman. Stay, and let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. Jae-hyun. Whatever she'd been about to say was cut off by the shrill ring of the doorbell. They froze, staring at each other in the darkness. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Then came the heavy pounding of fists on wood, and voices calling out in official tones. What's happening? Mina whispered. Jae-hyun's expression had gone cold and hard. I think I'm about to find out. He stood, pulling her with him, and together they left her room. Mrs. Choi was already in the foyer, opening the door to reveal 2 police officers in rain-soaked uniforms. Behind them stood a figure that made Jae-hyun's entire body go rigid. His stepbrother, Min-ho. Officers, thank you for coming, Min-ho said smoothly. I'm here to report an attempted murder. Excuse me, Mrs. Choi sputtered. Min-ho pointed directly at Jae-hyun. My brother tried to kill me. The car accident that supposedly left him paralyzed? He was driving. He tried to kill me and frame it as an accident. That's a lie, Jae-hyun said, his voice deadly calm. Is it? Min-ho pulled out his phone, displaying what looked like text messages. I have evidence. Messages, financial records, testimony from witnesses. You've been able to walk for months, haven't you, Hyung? Playing the victim while you plotted your revenge. The officers moved forward. Mr. Kim Jae-hyun, you're under arrest for attempted murder and fraud. Everything happened in slow motion. The officers approached, pulling out handcuffs. Mrs. Choi was crying, protesting. Minho was smiling with triumphant cruelty. And Jae-hyun, her fierce, powerful Jae-hyun, looked utterly defeated. "No," Mina heard herself say. She stepped forward, placing herself between Jae-hyun and the officers. "No, you can't arrest him. Miss, please step aside. He didn't do anything wrong. The accident—" She looked at Jae-hyun, saw the truth in his eyes. Tell them what really happened." "Mina," he said softly, "don't. I won't let them take you." He smiled then, sad and beautiful. "You already saved me. The moment you walked into my life, you saved me." The officers moved past her, cuffing his wrists. Minho watched with cold satisfaction, and Mina felt something in her chest crack wide open, all her fear and doubt crystallizing into perfect clarity. She grabbed Jae-hyun's hand, threading her fingers through his despite the handcuffs. When he looked at her with surprise and hope, she said the words she'd been too afraid to say. "I'll stand with you now." Her voice was steady, certain. "I cared for you when you couldn't stand. Now it's my turn to stand beside you." His eyes filled with emotion. "Mina, whatever comes next, we face it together." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm yours, remember? You don't get to go through this alone." As the officers led him away, Jae-hyun looked back at her one last time, and the love in his expression was worth every impossible thing that had brought them to this moment. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning. If you want to see part 2, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you think happens next. Will Mina prove Jae-hyun's innocence? Will Minho's lies destroy them? Comment your theories below. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of their story.